Classical mythologies have shaped the very world we live in.
Yeah, whatever. I don't have time for dense, dusty old books, Paul.
Great. Well, that's what podcasts are for.
Oh, good point.
Join me, Paul, as I teach my best friend and improv comedy partner, Sarah, all about mythology on Myth Understood.
Mythology is frequently explicit, obscene, violent, and bizarre, though, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to joke about and improvise along the way?
Yes.
Oh.
So come for the mythology and stay for the absurdity on Myth Understood.
Available now at mythunderstoodpodcast.com and your podcast platform of choice.
It's Myth Understood.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Steven Sabel.
Welcome, Quillers, to another fun and interesting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. I'm your host, Steven Sabel, welcoming you back. We're so glad that you choose to join us and that you have chosen to stream these many episodes of this wonderful program where we learn so much every 2 weeks about the Shakespeare authorship question with exciting guests and new information brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Don't forget, if you haven't already, please visit ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. It is your source and resource for everything Shakespeare authorship question. Today's episode, we welcome to the program a member of the Board of Trustees of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and a prominent businessman from the Napa, California region. His name is Ben August, and he's here to share an exciting story with us about a very unique item that is in his possession. Ben, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I've enjoyed your podcasts. I'm a little bit surprised to be on one, but it's certainly a pleasure.
Well, you have a very exciting piece of history in your possession that is directly tied and connected to Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, and in my mind, directly tied to the Shakespeare authorship question because that item lends some proof and credibility to some of the things that Oxfordians argue on a regular basis speak in favor of Edward de Vere being the true Shakespeare.
Yes, that's right. I think there's plenty of evidence that this certainly was owned by him and was used in research and for, I guess, the theme of one of his plays. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes, so let's tell the audience what it is exactly that you are currently holding in your hot little hands.
Well, let me hold it here. So what this is a book published in 1565. It's an Italian translation of Herodotus. So I am now holding it in my hands. It's a leather-bound volume. Fits nicely in the hand, very comfortably. You can hold it in one hand and thumb through it. It's very soft leather, and it's was published in 1565. So it's 55 years old. So
holy cow.
Yeah.
That's a long time for anything to survive, let alone a book of literature of that magnitude. And for our listeners who don't know who Herodotus is, he was not a Greek god or a member of the Greek mythology pantheon, but he was a Greek historian and a very famous Greek historian. Herodotus wrote a lot about what we later knew to be the history of the Greeks. And the version you're talking about that you're holding is the Italian translation from the original Greek, or is it the Italian translation of the Latin from the Greek? I wonder, do you know the answer to that?
You know what? I've read that, but I do not recall now off the top of my head, Stephen, which translation it is.
Well, either way, it's at least only 1 or 2 steps away from Herodotus' original Greek writings, which we are so lucky to even have been translated into other languages. And here you're holding a volume that is written in, how did the bard put it, extant Italian, I believe is a quote from one of the plays. And how thick is it? Is it a lot? Is it a thick, heavy book? But how many pages?
So it's about 1.5 inches thick. Let's see here. Yeah, 337 pages long. It's about, I would say, slightly less than 4 inches across and maybe slightly more than 5 inches tall. So it's like I said, it's a very comfortable book to fit into your hand. I could see Hamlet carrying this little book as he was walking around. It's just a very, very comfortable sized book. It's got the emblem of the de Vere family on the front cover, the boar, which is in gold, embossed. And it's
embossed in gold.
Yes. And it's got other emblems on each of the 4 corners of the front and on the binding as well. And then there's on the back another boar, in all of this in gold embossed.
So wouldn't to me that would bespeak that it was a custom bound version of the book just for the de Vere family.
I think so, yes.
I mean, I own a lot of books, and some of them are leather bound, and some of them are cloth bound, and some of them have paper dust jackets, but none of them have my family crest embossed on the cover of them. I don't even know how you could get something like that today. I'm going to have to search Amazon. Excuse me, can I get a custom embossed volume of Herodotus, please? Because I don't know how you would come about something like that. That had to be very specially made just for him or some other member of that family originally.
I would think so. And you can see it's hand done. I mean, I'm not familiar with the old book binding methods. I've seen some book binding done by hand and leather and so on, but this you can see, and when you open it up, you can see threads that are woven into or under the binding, I guess you would say. And it's, this book, I would say, has been read or at least handled, over the centuries. It's in good condition. The binding is very tight, but it's been handled. I mean, you can tell.
Have you discovered any torn pages or dog-eared pages or any notations on any of the pages inside the book in your perusal of it?
Well, there's this one section where it says, use for Hamlet. I'm just kidding.
Don't we wish?
Yeah, I know. That would be it. I was thinking about
we finally
joking.
found the smoking gun.
I was thinking maybe I should write this in here in like old ink or something. So I've actually gone through every single page, and there are not really any inscriptions or notes, and there aren't any dog-eared pages in the sense that a page was bent over or marked in some way.
No marginalia of any kind.
No, there isn't. The only inscriptions are in the front cover, on the title page, I guess you would say. There's a handwritten note that I asked Roger Strittematter about this, and he was debating at one point whether it could have been in Oxford's hands or in the cousin of Oxford, who this book was given to, Thomas Berkeley, may have written it. So we don't know, but I think I think Roger was saying it was probably either Oxford or Berkeley. And
What does the inscription read?
It's in, would this be Latin?
Is it also
Latin.
in Italian?
No, it's in Latin.
Latin.
So yes, and I'm not even going to attempt to read it, but the translation is something like, to Berkeley, the gift of Edward, Earl of Oxford. That's, I believe, a fairly close translation.
Okay.
And then what I thought was interesting too, there's another one below it that's also written, and it's a motto, I think, of the Berkeley family. And the translation, this is pretty cool. The translation is neither rashly nor timidly. And I believe that's their family motto or one of them.
Neither rashly nor timidly.
Yes.
Wow, that's a bit ambivalent, isn't it?
Well, when I found that translation, I was thinking that actually, in a way, could describe how I acquired this book in a way.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But what comes to mind is that is hot ice and wondrous strange snow, as the Duke Theseus, a Greek, says in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So that's very interesting. So other than the boar on the outside, and then these inscriptions inside, which say it was a gift from Edward to his cousin, Thomas Berkeley, a much younger cousin, by the way. And in a lot of families, and I know it's true in my family, I have a big Italian family. And in my family, I have first and second cousins that, because they are of the same generation as my mother, I refer to them as aunts and uncles, even though they're technically cousins and not aunts and uncles. And in Elizabethan times, they would refer to a kinsperson, a relative, as a cousin across a wide variety of definitions of family. And cousin was sort of like a universal word that was used for talking about a family member. So I'm wondering if there wasn't some sort of relationship between Edward and Berkeley that was more like an uncle-nephew type of relationship, maybe perhaps even mentoring or protege type of aspect, for him to have given this gift to his young cousin when he did.
Yes. Well, I think, again, nobody knows this for sure, but there was speculation that it was given to Thomas Berkeley in 1590, in or around 1590, around the time that he would have been entering Gray's Inn. He was an enrolled student, I guess, at Oxford, and was then going into Gray's Inn. So this would have been a suitable gift from, like you said, an older cousin or a uncle type figure.
So in 1865, when the book is published,
how
old?
1565. Yeah.
Well, it just took 300 years off of the book. 1565, when the book is published, how old is Edward de Vere at that time?
He would be 15 at that time.
15 years old, and enrolled at Cambridge University and near to graduation from Cambridge at that time, if my knowledge of his life is accurate at all. So here he is, close to graduating from Cambridge with his degree, planning to go to Gray's Inn and study law. And he gets this Herodotus volume, which obviously had to have been specially bound for him, and therefore may have even been a gift to him at that time. It's possible he bought it for himself, I suppose. We do have records of some of his book purchases, but I don't believe we have a record of this particular book being purchased, and certainly not at that time. But wouldn't it be fitting, it seems to me, then that we're talking, 25 years later, he then gifts the book to his young cousin / nephew, relative, at the same time that young man is about to graduate from Cambridge and enter Gray's Inn as a student of law. That's a pretty strong set of circumstances beyond coincidence in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. That makes sense.
It would make total sense, and it would make total sense coming from a man such as Edward de Vere, who benefited so greatly from the mentors he had in his own life, including probably most famously his uncle Arthur Golding, the translator of Ovid's Metamorphoses. And now here's Edward giving this translated version of Herodotus to this young man who is a family member in his life.
Yeah.
Now, here's the next question. How did you come to get it?
Okay. So it started with somebody in our organization, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, getting notified that this was coming up for auction at an auction house in England, London, I believe. And so this news circulated around amongst some members on an email excitedly. And we were speculating on who might buy it. And then eventually that morphed into, perhaps we can participate as an organization into acquiring it. Probably not for ourselves, but to assist another more established museum or library that is set up to protect something like this and make it available to scholars. But we wanted to potentially participate in acquiring it, make a donation toward acquiring this. So eventually, a large part of our membership was involved in raising money and making some, in many cases, significant donations toward a fund to acquire it.
And that shouldn't surprise any of our listeners who are familiar with our organization at all. This is a very important piece of memorabilia. It is definitely connected to Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. It demonstrates, in my mind, not only the connection we just talked about of the mentorship of his life, but also, if at the very minimum, demonstrates that at the age of 15, 16, he was obviously completely fluent in Italian, that he could read this book of Herodotus, which, by the way, most scholars agree is the source material for Titus Andronicus.
Right. Yeah, it's a very solid piece of evidence, and that I think what you're referring to this as a source material, that's pretty much maybe not undisputed, but that's generally agreed upon, isn't it?
It is. It's the general consensus is that most of the general consensus is that Titus Andronicus was one of the early members of the Shakespeare canon, that it's an earlier play that's partially based on the fact that it has such gory content. Some of that's based on the structures of some of the rhymes and some of the verse. I believe that one of the key reasons why we can date it fairly early in the canon is that it shows a certain amount of hubris and arrogance in the writer, who is obviously showing off his exceptional knowledge of the Greek masters and fills it with just about every allusion he possibly can to Greek history, to Greek tragedy, to the Greek masters, even though it's set as a Roman play. And one of the other things that I think spells it out quite nicely as an early piece is it's a very allegorical play. It has very strong allusions to a transition from an Old Testament belief system to a New Testament belief system, even having a clown named Stephen who is murdered, thus the first Christian martyr, in the middle of this ancient Roman play, which makes no sense at all. Except that when you look at some of the names of the characters and you look at the story being, changing from an eye for an eye and revenge to forgiveness, and that seems to be conducive to an earlier time for a writer. And so thus it would make sense that late teens, early 20s, when the Earl of Oxford is dabbling in putting his newfound learning and schooling into his theatrics.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard all that, but that makes a lot of sense and makes it much more interesting. Knowing that theory makes it much more interesting to me to get more familiar with the play. I enjoy knowing that.
I've been, Dr. Earl Showerman, he's been a regular guest on this series, and nearly every time he appears, I mention to him being, he being one of the preeminent scholars on the Greek influences upon Shakespeare. And some of his research is just so dynamic and so compelling. In fact, if listeners haven't already, they need to go back and look through the list of episodes and look for the ones where Earl and I have discussions about the Greek influences on Shakespearean writings. One of the most recent ones is Macbeth, for instance. We had a great conversation about that. But I always encourage him, he needs to do something on Titus. He needs to do something on Titus. And he always refuses. He always shies away. He says, no, I can't handle that play. It's too bloody. It's too violent. I won't do it. I can't do it. One of these days, I'm going to convince him that he has to. I think it's actually one of the more beautiful plays. And there are such strains of beauty in some of the monologues, particularly in that play, that if you extract the violence, you see the buds, the seeds of what this magnificent writer is definitely going to be and what he turns out to be. And it would be interesting if that book you're holding in your hands was the spark of creation for that work of art that we now know as Titus Andronicus.
Yeah, that's very neat.
But that doesn't answer, how the hell did you get it?
All right, so we're raising money, and I think the book had sold 4 years earlier, and this all just occurred last year. So I guess in 2015, somebody had traced the prior sale back, and it had sold for, I believe, around $4,000 or $5,000. So I think when we first started raising money, we were thinking we might be able to get, I think our goal was $3,000, so that we could then contribute that toward an organization, museum, or library that would be able to buy it and use our funds. And I think Don Rubin was the one sort of leading the fundraising, and it was just amazing how much money poured in, and we got past 3,000, 4,000. It just created a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement. And I think that there was speculation at the auction house that the book would go for 8,000 to 10,000, possibly.
I want to say I recall that because I was included in the email threads at the time when the fund was created and members were pledging their amounts that they were going to contribute. And I remember the discussion being that the goal was to be able to come up with enough money to at least be a viable bidder and to hopefully entice someplace like the Folger Library or the Huntington Library, whom we've had various interactions with throughout the years, to sort of join us in the effort, and that they would eventually be the possessor of the book under the agreement that our organization would be able to have access to it if we wanted to for various presentations or study or whatever. Is that pretty much correct?
Yes, that's right. But I think, at least in my view, and maybe this is my own interpretation, but I think we wanted some acknowledgement that we had made the contribution, toward the acquisition of the book, because I think it's important, and I think others do too, that, this book is significant because it was Edward de Vere's, and because at least we believe, and many other scholars believe, that Edward de Vere was Shakespeare. It's not just an old book. It's the book that we believe was owned not just by Edward de Vere, but by Shakespeare. So I think if we had bought it either and then gifted it to the Huntington, for instance, or the Folger, we would want it to be known that we're the ones that either contributed or bestowed it upon them.
And how did they respond to our solicitation of such?
So we very delicately, and we have some people, I think Earl is one, and Don Rubin, I think, approached both of those, starting with the Huntington, and offered to help buy it, to make a contribution toward its purchase, and our offer was declined, and just it was, as far as I could tell, sort of a curt reply, a rejection of our offer, essentially. And we're running out of time. This is like a couple of days now before the auction is going to take place. And we had, I think by this time, gotten very close to $8,000, something like that. And so we thought we might actually have enough to win the auction. So then Don very quickly went to the Folger, which has an enormous collection of Shakespeare artifacts, as well as Edward de Vere artifacts and volumes and so on. And they also turned us down. So
yeah, and I think listeners need to ask themselves this very important question. Why would the Shakespeare Folger Library, and that's what it's called, the Shakespeare Folger Library, why would the Shakespeare Folger Library have been spending so much time over so many years getting their hands on as much Edward de Vere memorabilia as they could possibly snatch up? What purpose would the Shakespeare Folger Library possibly have? What interest could they possibly have in some 17th Earl of wherever, unless they believe secretly somewhere that it will be revealed that Edward de Vere is the true Shakespeare, and they'll be able to say, and we own all this stuff?
Exactly.
Don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. That's what's so maddening. That's what, I don't want to say it infuriates me. I'm not, I guess, at that level, but it's extremely frustrating. I guess the intellectual dishonesty that some of these organizations or scholars seem to have. I think it's deceptive for them to be acquiring this stuff and then essentially suppressing it, or suppressing their true motives or possibly hidden understanding.
Locking it away like the secret Vatican archives or something.
Yeah. So that's where we were. This is like 24 hours before the auction. We've gotten turned down by the two, organizations that we think are most likely to be interested and to want to have it in their collection and to take good care of it and to make it available to scholars and so on for research.
And they basically said, thank you, but no thank you, you crazy Oxfordians, go take a hike.
Exactly.
Just days before the actual auction. Do you think that they held off giving a reply on purpose for a reason?
That I don't know, because I don't know exactly what the timing was of Don. I mean, we were in a time crunch already, so they may have taken 48 hours or something, and I don't know. But it never occurred to me they were dragging their feet on their response. I guess so. I'm not maybe that cynical, but
I believe in the malice. I believe in the potential malice of the institutions and people of power, and I'm not so sure that they didn't have plans of their own to try to acquire the book and become their own separate bidder. And we may have even shot ourselves in the foot by alerting them to our intent to bid at all in the first place. I don't know that for a fact, but it certainly could be a possibility.
Yes,
especially when we get to that part of the story. But before we do that, so what happened? How did you end up being a bidder? How did that happen? What happened there?
Well, I mean, I was in fact early on when I first heard about this. I went and looked up the auction house and decided to enter myself as a bidder. There's a process you have to go through to get to be an approved bidder. I forget what it was, no big deal. So, and I think you can put in a bid prior to the auction starting. So I put a very low bid in just to make sure it could get lodged, and it did. And I sent an email out saying that I had done that. And that might have even been before we started. Well, I guess it was. It had to have been before we even started raising money. And then once we started raising money, of course, I was part of that. So, but Don knew that, and because I had contributed some money and was somewhat familiar with the process, he ended up asking me if I would represent the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship in the auction. I was getting updates up until the very end, I think even the night before, on what we had raised, and I think it was, maybe it was right around 8,000 plus or minus $8,000.
That's a lot of money for a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, possibly in our view, enough based on the estimates from the auction house to acquire it. So we were all very excited. It was a big night. Like, are we gonna get it? Because we know it's Shakespeare. We know it's a book owned by Shakespeare. I mean, I feel very, very confident, and I know everybody else does too. So it's an amazing thing to have a chance at owning, and having possession of.
Well, because we know for a fact that the guy from Stratford never owned a book. So if you believe he's Shakespeare, you'll never own a book by Shakespeare. But
Right.
if you believe the Earl of Oxford is Shakespeare, there are more books out there that were owned by him that we know for a fact were owned by him. And some of them are owned by the Folger Library.
Right.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So you registered yourself with an account, basically, and that makes sense. That if it's a major auction house, you're talking about a high-priced item. You've got to register yourself as a user. I'm sure you probably had to provide some sort of credit card or banking information or something that would prove that if you were to win a bid, you had the wherewithal to back it up and provide the funding.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm sure all registered users of that auction house probably have to do the same thing, but it's good that you had that foresight to say, okay, well, one of us has to at least have an account so that we can actually bid, or we may find ourselves, at the last minute, not even being able to be acknowledged. So that was really smart.
Well, I don't want to be taking credit for being smart, but I said, hey, I'm going to get in on this. Again, it was before we had all gathered together to do it as a team. So I just figured, hey, I'm going to take a shot at it, Anyway, so we circled back and it's going to be coming up within 24 hours. And what's funny, Stephen, is, I told Don I would do it, which I'm, more than happy to do. In the back of my mind, I was actually thinking, well, look, if we have $8,000 and the bids are, going a little bit higher, I'll just throw in a little extra money, and get this thing for the organization. But what's really funny is, as it turns out, this is taking place in London, and I'm on the West Coast. So I looked up the auction, the starting time now. Things are getting real, getting serious. The auction starts at 2:30 in the morning.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
Because it's London time, right?
Right. So I do a little more digging, and I talk to a couple people there at the auction house, and they tell me that this item, I think it was number 316, should be coming up around 6:30 in the morning. So that was good. I can get up at 5, have my coffee, get geared up, and be ready at 6:30. The problem is, I had a flight to Houston that same morning that happened to be, it was like at 6:40 or 6:45. It was really weird.
That could have been disastrous.
It could have been. I did have a backup plan. I had a plan B and a plan C. When I realized all this was happening, I didn't want to let anybody down. So I called my mother and asked her, I gave her my passwords to the auction house. And I told her the situation, and I asked her to bid for me in the event that my plane, if they closed the door and I lost cell service, I was going to call her. I wanted her to be up and ready to go on my behalf.
So you're sitting there in pre-flight on the tarmac in the plane, wondering if the captain's going to taxi out to the runway and turn on the sign saying, please put all electronic devices in airplane mode or whatever. You've got this backup plan with your mother, but even if so, what was your plan? Was your last communication would have been to her saying, I'm going dark for a while. Take it away, Mom.
Yes.
What?
Yeah. And so we had this all set up. She was, she didn't get an account, but she was all set up and ready to go. And she was going to use my account. But then she started getting cold feet. So that's why I had to have a plan C. I told her that if it went over 10,000 to keep going. And I told her, I forget what number I gave her, but I gave her a number. I think it was at least twice as high as what, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship had agreed to. And I just I'll figure it out later.
So at that point you were like, okay, I'm now the matching grant writer here.
Right. So I told her that, but then she started getting cold feet because she's just not, she's not an auction person. She's not, a high risk gambler or something like that. And she didn't want to do the wrong thing. So I called my sister and then my sister, she'll do it, and so my sister was teed up as well. So one of the two of them would take over for me if I was locked out. And
this suddenly became a giant August family affair.
That's right. So it was very tense because, gosh, this was so important. Again, the idea of having a book owned by Shakespeare is just an amazing thing, and we all love Shakespeare and Edward de Vere. We know his story, and it's just a very precious. It's a precious thing. Item, it's a very endearing item. So it's very important. So if you want me to tell you, man, I can tell you how it all came down on the plane because
so now I feel like this needs to be a made-for-TV movie all of a sudden.
Because not exactly.
No, it's getting tense. There's moms waiting, sisters waiting, everybody. The pilot is completely oblivious and just going about his business, but the clock is ticking because that plane needs to taxi out to the runway. And when did the bidding open?
Well, so in fact, let me tell you one more thing, because this is a little
Sure.
bit of a funny story. I started getting nervous. This is like, item number 250, and these each item is like 90 seconds long. I mean, it's so fast, and they're speaking from London. I can't even understand necessarily every single thing they're saying. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been at a live auction. I've been to some live auctions before, and it's like, it takes a while to learn the system, and I'm talking about when I'm there in person, let alone, in an airport, with the distractions in the airport, and you're trying to understand exactly what's going on, right? So I decided I better bid on something else just to make sure, like, they hear me and I can get my bids in or something. I don't think I've ever.
That's smart too. That's a great test. What the hell did you bid on though?
Yeah, I know. So I don't think I've ever told anybody this, but I bid on it's an autographed, or it's a written phrase by Wordsworth, and then signed by Wordsworth.
Okay.
And so I just said, hey, I'm going to bid on this and just see what happens. And I bid fairly early, like 45 seconds, 60 seconds into this, and these things go so quickly. Well, I ended up buying it. I got trapped.
You own that too.
So I own that too. That was cheap. It was I guess in the conversion of pounds or something, it was like $1,500 for this item. So yes, I own that as well. That was my trial run to make sure I
hope you have
get
it
in.
framed in your office somewhere. Or one of the things we didn't mention at the top of the program is you're also a winemaker there in Napa. So do you have that framed somewhere in your wine cellar or in your press room? Or I don't know a lot about winemaking, so I might be just throwing
Yes.
stuff out there. Is there such a thing as a press room?
There is, yes. I do have it in my library, and it's in a
good.
prominent place. So it's a nice memory.
Good.
So that was, item 270 or whatever. So now I knew I could be heard, and I could bid, and I can win if I have enough money. So we're flying through this and flying through it, and it's going quickly enough. I'm looking at my watch and looking at the number we're on, and so on. So I'm thinking, I think I can make this. I think I can make this. I think I'm going to be able to do it. And it was so close, Stephen, that the door shut. When they shut the door to the plane, and that's actually when they tell you you need to turn your cell phones off. But I know I do fly quite a bit, or at least I used to before COVID. So I was very familiar with the process. I knew I had probably there 10 minutes or so. But so I quietly just, sunk down in my seat and was listening in, and literally it's going through this, each one 60 to 90 seconds and getting closer and closer and closer. And I'm wondering if I'm going to make it. I'm hoping
You're
I'm
the
going to make it.
subterfuge bidder ducking beneath the airplane seat while the stewardess is walking by so she doesn't catch you.
Right. So anyway, the item comes up, and I'm like, I was actually sweating. I remember my palms being sweaty and holding my phone. And this is going so quickly. Opening bid is probably 5,000 or something. And it's just going back and forth. Quickly, like it gets to 10,000. And these are in pounds. So, what gets me going more than anything else, Stephen, is the idea that these organizations, the Huntington and the Folgers, and I'm absolutely convinced that's who I was bidding against, because there were two other bidders that were very active. What fires me up is that one of these organizations would end up with it and bury it, like you said, suppress it, and deny that they believe this was owned by Shakespeare. And I felt like I was on a mission. I didn't want that to happen. And even looking back on it now, I don't have any remorse. I'm glad it happened. It ended up going for a much higher price than I ever imagined, or, prepared for. But, I don't regret doing it. And I'm glad they don't have it. And I'm glad that we have it. And, it's public information that this is owned by an Oxfordian group. And this is why it has the value that not just we, but two other bidders. I'm willing to bet it was the Folger. I'll bet them publicly. I would, wager them, challenge them to deny that they were the bidders. But I believe it was the Folger and the Huntington. And, we outbid them. It went very, very quickly. It was over in a minute and a half. And the final bid was...
wait a minute. Before you reveal that. So it's ticking. It's ticking up. And as you say, it's happening like lightning fast, right? Because you said it was over in a minute and a half. So it's ticking. It starts at 5. It goes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's ticking. Did it jump in large amounts, or did it continue to rise by like 1,000 at a time?
I think it was going at 1,000 at a time once it got momentum. And I even tried. And again, you have to understand, I couldn't clearly hear. I was in the plane, and I was afraid to, like, sometimes in auctions, you can sort of like go quiet for a second and wait till they go once, going twice, and I tried to do that once or twice, but I was afraid that I would miss, and they would put the hammer down on somebody else,
Sure.
So I couldn't take too much of a risk. And I was very hyped up. I'm sure there was a lot of adrenaline going. So it just kept going, and I tried to slow down a couple times, but when I did, the other two bidders kept going.
So when it hit 20, what did you think?
Well, I think probably by the time it got to 20, we're not on regular radio or anything, so but I'm not going to curse, but I just said,
okay, our listeners are used to it. It's fine.
I just said, I'm going to do it. I don't care. I was pissed. I said, I'm just going to do it.
So you had a WTF moment, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So I just said, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let these bastards win this thing.
Okay, so then it gets to 25, and what did you think?
But I was not even thinking anymore. I mean, it's like, it doesn't even matter. It's just, I'm going to go. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to do it,
How high did it go?
Well, in dollars, with the fees and everything, it came to $65,000.
$65,000?
Yeah. I'm holding a $65,000 book that was owned by Shakespeare.
Oh my God, Ben August. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I don't think I own anything that's worth $65,000. Maybe my house. Well, I don't even own my house. The bank owns my house. I pay a mortgage every month. Holy cow. Wow.
Yeah.
I know you could not have planned that it was going to go that high.
No, I never would have dreamt that. I mean, that was so far away. Again, the thoughts were, 8 to 10,000. It might go. I mean, in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe we're being too conservative. Maybe it'll go to 12 or 13. I was prepared for probably 15 in my mind. I was prepared. I probably knew in advance I would go to 15 and just I'd work it out with the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. We'd do something, and at least we would have it, right?
I'm going to make this bet. I'm going to make the bet that neither your mom nor your sister would have ever gone that high.
No. Well, I'm not sure where I would have capped them. I may have said 20. If I had to pass it on to them. But I wouldn't have said whatever it takes, because that's like, I would have landed 3 hours later. What? Are you crazy?
What did you do? Well, you
Yeah.
said whatever it takes.
Right.
We didn't know when to stop. This is why I didn't want to do this in the first place. I knew I was going to make a mistake.
Right.
Wow, holy macaroni. That's, what'd you say, 337 pages is the book?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to do the math, but oh man, that's too much math for my brain right now.
That's a lot. $200 a page? I don't know, whatever that comes to.
Something close to that.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
to me, if you say there's a moral to the story, to me, what this tells us, the lesson is, why would these guys pay this much for a book? And something that, hasn't been mentioned is there are other books published around that same time period, owned by other noblemen, let's say. And they're not selling for $65,000. They're selling for $4,000, $5,000, like would have been expected and like happened with this book, 5 years ago. So to me, this is another piece of evidence that, there's some entities out there who also believe this book is significant because of its association with Shakespeare.
I would say that you're absolutely spot on there, because the fact that I think it's ironic that there were two other bidders willing to go that high and to drive it that high after we contacted at least two. And I want to say there was a third library that we contacted as part of that whole thing. But ironically, after these libraries were contacted, who have much deeper pockets than we do, and I'm saying that you're absolutely right in your assessment that at least one of those was one of those bidders. Now, it could have been that there was another bidder that was some very eccentric collector. But also, I would agree with this: whoever those bidders were, they knew that book belonged to the real Shakespeare, or they never would have bid that high.
Right. They wouldn't have had to.
No, absolutely not. And you're right. That is just another pice of fabulous evidence, very expensive evidence for you, but fabulous evidence. So now I'm gonna ask you this question. I hope I'm not scraping a scab off of a wound when I ask you this. But just knowing how things work and the dynamic works here in my own home, what did your wife say when you let her know this news?
Well, I do have a very unique and special situation. My wife has learned over the years to let me do what I'm going to do. So I actually think when I didn't tell her in advance what I was possibly going to be doing. I surprise her with stuff every now and then. So I think I told her after I landed what had happened, and she was very happy for me. Again, I didn't have to take out a loan to get it. I have the funds to make it happen, and she's used to me doing things in passion, and she supports me 100%.
That's fantastic. And God bless her for that. And God bless you. And God bless the fates that allowed that auction to happen before that pilot taxied down that runway.
Yes, that was
or
lucky.
else we would not be having this conversation right now. And a member of our organization wouldn't own an actual book that was owned by the real Shakespeare and the source material for one of his most famous early plays, Titus Andronicus. That's just fantastic. What a great story. I'm telling you, that's a made-for-TV movie that needs to happen. You had me on the edge of my seat, and I'm sure that some of our listeners were sitting here the whole time, sitting on the edge of their seat as well. And right now, they're probably wiping their own beads of sweat off their brow and agreeing with me that they would love to have seen that play out with the airplane door closing and you trying to duck beneath the seat and stay on your phone so the stewardess doesn't see you. Yeah, all that's great cinema right there, brother.
Oh, good.
Oh, fabulous. And so you brought the book with you. I know because I was there and I had a chance to see it. You brought the book with you to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Annual Conference last October in Hartford, Connecticut. And you were able to display it to us all. And I know there were a few very eager scholars who couldn't wait to just get their hands on it, touch it, leaf through it a little bit, treat it with kid gloves, literally kid gloves.
Yeah.
I know that you've talked about having it available at other Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship events in the future. You say it's in really good condition, but I would think not only the enormous value it has to history and to literature, but also the enormous value it has to your bank account. Are you really, do you ever feel like, oh my God, I need to put this thing under glass. I need to lock it in a vault somewhere and protect it? Like, how do you feel about it in that sense?
Well, first of all, I did buy a humidor specifically for it. So I've got it in a temperature controlled, humidity controlled environment. So I treat it as it deserves and must be treated. And I only open it or hold it with gloves on to keep any oils or moisture away from it. But I live in Napa. I my wine collection is actually my that's the room that I protect most carefully, and it's got a very significant collection in there. So I'm used to having stuff here at the house where there's a high value and we have a secure environment. That's all I could say.
Well, so you must have had a little bit of familiarity with auctions. Then, if you're a wine collector, I would suppose, maybe I'm wrong, but I would suppose that at least some of the bottles of wine you must have picked up at auction at some point. No, is that a false assessment?
No, it's true. No, I buy not a lot, but I do routinely buy rare wines at auction, wines that I really want to enjoy. I drink them. There are some people who invest in wine. I buy and drink wine because I want to try whatever the wine industry can produce at the highest level. I've been fortunate to enjoy some of the best wines that are made. And I do buy them on auction. I've been
fortunate to enjoy some of the wines that you make. And in fact, there's a bottle sitting here in my personal library that I'm looking right at. It's a very empty bottle of your wine because I drank it. But I saved the bottle because I love the label, and it has Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, right there on the label.
That's right. That's me. It's Earl 17 is my label. It's to honor Edward de Vere and Shakespeare. It's got the bust of Edward de Vere that was sculpted by Paula Slater back in, I think, 2010, I believe, is when we sculpted it. Anyway, it's a beautiful piece, and that's on the label, that sculpture.
It is a beautiful piece, and I have had the fortune of standing next to it because I believe you brought it to the SOF conference in Ashland, Oregon in 2015.
Yes, I did.
And I have a photograph of myself with the Earl of Oxford, that bust. That is one of my prized selfies that I've ever taken in my life.
Cool.
Yes, that is a very beautiful piece and magnificent choice to put it on the label of your wine.
Yes, and by the way, you were saying earlier about me bringing this book. I do plan on bringing it to every conference in the future, and whenever they're in Ashland, like next year's, I believe, will be in Ashland, I would plan on bringing the original bust as well.
Well, that's correct. Well, this year we were supposed to be in Ashland for our annual conference. And of course, with the virus situation the way that it was, that had to be postponed until next fall. But you're right, the 2021 conference will be held in Ashland. And in lieu of this year's conference, we're having a symposium, a virtual symposium that will be broadcast live on the SOF YouTube channel. And that's going to be October 2nd and 3rd. And we're going to be broadcasting live from your home and winery in Napa, California.
That's right.
So that's a wonderful tie-in for us to alert our listeners to. And if you're interested in learning more about the symposium coming up October 2nd and 3rd, 2020, live from Napa, California, you can go to the SOF website. That's ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. You can register for the symposium there. It is free of charge. You don't have to register in order to view the symposium, but if you do register, we'll send you an email with registration materials that will also be free, such as the symposium syllabus, the schedule of broadcasts, details about the presenters and the abstracts of their presentations, some source material and resources, some reading lists, everything to help supplement your experience so that you can fully enjoy the symposium. It's free to register. It's free to view. It will be available live on our YouTube channel Friday evening, October 2nd, from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and Saturday, October 3rd, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time. So please visit the website, sign up for the source materials, join us for that evening and next day. Live free symposium, including some of the best scholars that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship has to offer, live from the beautiful setting of Ben's location in Napa, California. And we're grateful to you, Ben, for being the host of that wonderful event that's coming up.
It's my pleasure and privilege, and thanks for having me on, Stephen. I've really enjoyed it.
We're going to have to find a moment during the broadcast to display that bust and that beautiful book that was owned by that beautiful man that we all agree is the true Shakespeare.
Absolutely.
That'll be a wonderful opportunity for our listeners to see firsthand that golden embossed boar on the cover of that soft leather bound volume of the Italian translation of Herodotus that was most likely the brain spark of the play Titus Andronicus. Thanks so much for sharing this story, Ben. It was a wonderful story. I swear to you, you had me on the edge of my seat. I'm going to try to write a screenplay now and pitch it to a Hollywood producer. And I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing this story and knowing that a piece of valuable memorabilia connecting our author to his works is in the possession of a fine Oxfordian who will always care for it and treasure it as such. And if you'd like to know more, please visit ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. Remember, this program is generously brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. I'm your host, Steven Sabel, thanking you for joining us, reminding you to give us a rate and review wherever you're streaming this broadcast from. Make sure you go and stream the other episodes if you haven't already. We're now approaching more than 40 episodes of this fabulous broadcast. And we're so glad that you can join us from wherever you are, whether it's your car, your shower, or on your morning jog. Thanks for having us with you. And don't forget, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.